Hi, everyone. I'm Christian Novak from Fargo South High School. This year, I'm a coach for Fargo South High School's debate team. But if you've been in debate in the past, you might know me as one of the assistant coaches. I guess I just was the assistant coach for Fargo North for the last 6 years, 7 years. It's kind of hard to keep track at this point. Um, anyway, I'm here to give you a little rundown on a major aspect of Lincoln Douglas debate, and just how you go about starting the process of writing a case for Lincoln Douglas. And we'll also get a little bit of analysis of the first topic we'll be debating for competition this year, the 2020 November-December topic. So the topic that we are eventually going to analyze after we get through a little bit of LD background knowledge and foundational stuff is this. Resolved, the United States ought to provide a federal jobs guarantee. And we'll break that down later. But just keep in mind as we're going through this information about building an LD case, what sorts of, we'll be talking about values and criterions a bit today. What sorts of values and criterions that we talk about here are things that you might want to incorporate when thinking about this topic. This presentation is going to focus on case construction specifically, and case construction is what you end up plugging into the first speaking time for each side. So on your screen here, you see the list of speeches that make up a Lincoln Douglas round. And that constructive speech on each side, the aff constructive speech and the neg constructive speech, that's what this case construction presentation, that's where this information gets applied. The bare minimum that you need to have ready for your very first debate tournament is having a case for each side of the topic. Your coaches will probably have a higher bare minimum than just the case. But in order to, be in a debate round, the case is really what you need to start. So that's what we're talking about today. A solid case is going to look a lot like the 5-paragraph essays you might be used to writing for school. It'll have an introduction, and Lincoln Douglas's introductions are a little bit special. There's an extra layer to the introduction in a Lincoln Douglas case versus a public forum case. You'll have 2 or 3 contentions as your body paragraphs for your case. And those are where you're detailing your key claims, your points that help prove your overall narrative true. And you'll have evidence for those contentions, and we'll talk about that more once we get past introduction stuff. Conclusions in Lincoln Douglas are very easy. If you look at documents that I have attached to the 2020 debate workshop agenda, you'll see an outline for Lincoln Douglas cases. It basically has a fill in the box section for the conclusion. It's very simple, very straightforward. But introduction is definitely the highest learning curve part of LD because it contains a few special parts, special ingredients. So here's everything that might go into your introduction. You might include a quotation that helps introduce your side of the debate. This is optional, though. A lot of coaches really, really like when students do this, though. It just gives the judge a nice frame of mind with which they can approach the rest of your case. So some sort of shocking quotation or relevant quotation that's going to hopefully stick with your judge as the overarching view of your side. Your introduction will also have a value. We'll talk about value and criterion a little bit more in depth here. Your introduction will also have definitions for anything either from the resolution or from your framework. And framework is just a fancy word for value and criterion. So you might need definitions for certain words in the resolution or from your value and criterion. You'll also include a quick preview of what your points, your contentions are going to be. Once you get out of that introduction, you'll be moving into your body paragraphs where you'll get kind of into details for each specific point. So it's important in your introduction that you give your audience kind of a quick roadmap, like where are we going to be going in this speech? But values, if you get nothing out of this presentation, if you get one thing out of this presentation, I should say, I hope that it's you know a little bit more about how values work in Lincoln-Douglas debate. So they're the core of what makes LD what it is. And I think an easy way to look at this is here that you see on screen. In public forum, the default way to judge the round is a cost-benefit analysis, which is just, thinking and weighing what are the upsides to an action and what are the downsides to an action. It's like a pro-con takedown of whatever action you're looking at. And the types of things that you plug into that cost-benefit analysis might be very different. Your point might be like, we'll lose human lives if we take this action, or it will cost a lot of money if we take this action, or it might be we save a lot of lives or save a lot of money. But that general everything, like anything goes sort of cost-benefit analysis, that's kind of what makes public forum what it is. It's more focused on things you can empirically prove are either a cost or a benefit. So evidence in that cost-benefit analysis. In Lincoln-Douglas, part of the round is deciding what we should value most when doing that cost-benefit analysis. So, I want you, before we talk about like how a value works in your case, I want you to think for a second. Values are just a judgment of what is important in the world. So you see two values here on this slide. Justice. Justice is a value. That's something that a lot of people deem important. It's an ideal. So values like justice fit perfectly in debate. We always want to talk about, what is most just for the U.S. government to do, or what actions infringe upon justice, for example. Other values that are still values, beauty is a value here, other values don't fit debate as much. We're not usually concerned with, making the world a super beautiful place in debate. We're boring like that. Sorry. So before I move to the next slide, I want you to think for just a second. You can pause the video if you'd like. Think for just a second, like, what are all the values that you could think of? And don't just think about like debatey values. Broaden your horizons. Think about like what values you hold, or your family holds, or maybe your religion holds, or your school, or whatever. Think about those. All right, I'm going to move to the next slide. You might have thought of some of these on the page here. You can look around here. We see that justice we talked about. We see family is a value. Things like security are values. Not everything you see on screen here is a value we use in debate. If you really wanted to know what things you might see in debate from this side, the ones I've circled here are pretty common values in debate. So your case, each of your cases, both your AF case and your neg case, will have a value. It might be different for each side. You might say for the AF case, my value is going to be safety for the round. Or you might say your value is going to be human dignity. So when you do give that value out, you'll also want to justify that value. Why is this value the thing that should be most considered in the round? Why should this be the thing we're trying to achieve the most? Oftentimes, the resolution will help you figure out what your justification is. Because obviously, like if the resolution is about what the United States ought to do, like our resolution this year is, then that helps you narrow down your justification quite a bit. Because a government like the United States, we have documents, we have a constitution, we have a Declaration of Independence, we have, we have a lot of philosophy about what governments ought to do for their people. And so, if you pick a value, you can start to then talk about like, oh, a primary concern of any government is making sure that justice is achieved. On top of the value, you'll also have a criterion, what's known as a criterion. The best analogy I can give you for this, criterions are tough. You will not understand criterions. Maybe this year, you might not understand criterions. But I want to give you as good of a start with criterions as possible. So, criterions are the measuring stick for your case. If you've already decided what value is most important in the round, and you've got a good reason for that, you just need to then tell the judge, this is how I'm going to be figuring out whether my side meets my value better than the other side does. So take this value I have on screen here, justice. These are two criterions that you'll almost certainly see at some point in your debate career. Rule of law and the difference principle. Both of these criterions are different measuring sticks that can tell us when we have achieved justice or when we are increasing justice. Rule of law would say that the way that you achieve justice is by making sure that no person is above the law. The law treats all equally. And so if you were, thinking about any resolution or any topic in debate, and you had a value of justice with a criterion of rule of law, your points would then focus in on how that topic either undermines the equal treatment of people under the law or increases the equal treatment of people under the law. And through that criterion of rule of law, you would then be achieving justice. The difference principle, on the other hand, is another totally valid way of measuring justice, but it has a very different take on what is just, how you get to justice. Difference principle is an idea that was developed by this guy named Rawls. And one thing that Rawls frequently liked to talk about was how a society can only be judged on how it treats the least well off. So a society can only be judged on how well it treats the people in the poorest conditions or the people who are in slavery in certain instances. That's the only way that we can judge the morality or the justness of actions. We have to look deeply at how that action affects the most adversely left people. Which sounds like a totally valid way of measuring justice, right? If you're thinking about if justice is about fairness and about giving people what they're due, then the people who are left behind in a society, it's probably pretty important, if you're trying to be just, to make sure that those people are treated well. So hopefully after learning a little bit more about each of these two criterions that work with justice, rule of law, and difference principle, you're starting to see how each of these two different routes to justice, each of these different measuring sticks for justice, would function. You would then, so if you have your value and your criterion for measuring that value, that then guides what the rest of your case should be about. It guides those contentions. So contentions or points are like the body paragraphs of a debate case. The very first thing you'll have in your contention is a tagline, which is just a short way for the judge and your opponent to remember your point. And there's no rules for taglines. But basically, when you're writing a tagline, you want to make sure that it's something that can quickly be written on the flow and also give the gist of your point. So I usually like to tell my students like 3 to 7-ish words for a tagline. Oh, and I have an example here too. So contention 1, a jobs guarantee prevents homelessness. There you go. It's short, it's quick, it's to the point. It's not very many words to write down. So that'll be how you start your contention. But after your tagline, you might need to explain a little bit more about what you mean by your tagline. So since your tagline is going to be very short, it might need a bit of expanding in order to convey the claim that you're trying to prove. So you have your tagline. You might need a little bit of explanation of what your tagline's really talking about, like an expanded claim. But once that claim is clear, then it's time to prove it using evidence. You might have heard from either your coach or from, the debate workshop even, that public forum is the form of debate that's more focused on evidence versus Lincoln Douglas. Lincoln Douglas cares about evidence. It's just not the end-all, be-all of the debate. It's not going to end up being like, oh, your card is 2 years old, so we can't really use it. We can't look to this in the round. We have to look at my card, which is like from 2020. You have less of that in Lincoln Douglas debate. But you still want to find a reliable source. And when you're citing a source in your case, you want to at least include the author's last name and the year of publication. That is actually a rule for debate in North Dakota. That is the bare minimum that you can include in order to use a source. So, Novak 2020 or Nelson 19. That's frequently how you'll hear pieces of evidence cited. You may also need a warrant to explain how this evidence proves what you're trying to prove, if not immediately obvious. I won't go into that since there are other presentations from the workshop that go over it quite nicely. Erica Flores had a very wonderful presentation on this subject, so I highly recommend that you look at that. But once you've got your data and your warrant to prove your claim, I need you to tell me why it matters. Give me the impact of what you've just proved. Why is it important in the round, or important in the world in general? And why is it important to your value or criterion? If you're not impacting things, then it's hard to weigh the information you're giving me versus the stuff your opponent is giving me. And this is something that you can pretty easily think about too. Let's think about 2 different arguments. One, an app speaker that's telling me that if we negate, we're going to kill thousands of people. So that ends up giving me an impact because it tells me what's going to happen, why this matters. It's evident that I don't want to kill people by voting negative. And then the next speaker is telling me a little bit about like how, I don't know, puppies get a little less cute if you vote AF. And so the difference in the impacts there are clear. Lives versus puppy cuteness, right? So to a judge, I wouldn't need a debater to tell me what the impact calculus there would be. I can kind of intuitively figure that out. But you as a debater, whenever you are giving your, more reasonable arguments, you will want to include a little bit about why this is important, especially in LD, because you always want to connect things back to your value and criterion. So let's go back to that sample tagline we've got here. A jobs guarantee prevents homelessness. And let's say I'm using my value and criterion that we talked about earlier, justice, with the difference principle as my criterion. So remember, difference principle talks about how well off, or how a society treats the least well off. So if a jobs guarantee prevents homelessness is my contention, and I prove that, at the end of that contention, I might write in something like, preventing homelessness is necessary to meeting the criterion of the difference principle because homeless people are one of the many groups of people that are not well off in society. So if we can improve the lot of homeless people, then we are well on way to achieving or improving justice in the United States. That was off the top of my head, and it could be worded better, certainly. But that's the idea of what you want to get here. You want to make sure that you are connecting every point you make. Each point should connect back to that value and criterion. Otherwise, what you're telling me is, you just gave me a point that you have said shouldn't really matter in the round. If it doesn't fit your value and criterion, then, your introduction was all about we need to focus on justice in the round and difference principle. And then the point you bring up has nothing to do with either. It's kind of hard to figure out what to do with that. You're kind of debating against yourself in a way. All right. This brings me back to what I want to do a little bit of today, which is to look at the November-December topic for Lincoln Douglas. Again, the resolution is the United States ought to provide a federal jobs guarantee. So let's break this down. The United States. The United States is, in this resolution, what we call the actor. I want you to remember that the debate in this case is not just a general, are federal jobs guarantees good or bad? Throughout the debates, you will probably talk about whether federal jobs guarantees are good or bad. But the topic, what we're trying to vote on here, is whether or not the United States ought to provide this guarantee. Ought is a big word in Lincoln Douglas. Almost every resolution in Lincoln Douglas will have this word ought in it somewhere. And ought just means, it's a word that indicates duty or correctness, and it indicates moral obligation. Is there some sort of obligation, moral requirement, that the United States has to provide a federal jobs guarantee? And federal jobs guarantees are exactly what they sound like. You'll definitely need to do a lot of research into what the contours of a federal jobs guarantee looks like. But essentially what it would mean is that the United States government would act as the employer of last resort. You'll almost certainly hear that phrase in your debates, employer of last resort. And all that means is if a job seeker is looking and looking and looking and looking for a job, and there's nothing out there, the United States government would be the last resort. They would be able to, and they would have systems in place that would guarantee some sort of federal employment for this person. And that's all this resolution is asking us, whether or not the United States has a moral obligation to provide that federal jobs guarantee for individuals. So even though we broke down each individual part, it might not seem like, we've talked about much more than is immediately obvious in the resolution, right? We've talked about three major parts here: the United States, ought, and federal jobs guarantee. But frequently when we're talking about federal jobs guarantees, there's specific plans out there that involve the federal jobs guarantee. The reason this is such a hot topic is because a federal jobs guarantee is a major part of the Green New Deal. So, while you don't have to defend the Green New Deal, because that's not what this topic is about, learning about the Green New Deal would certainly be useful in, learning what a federal jobs guarantee would actually look like. And while federal jobs guarantees, the way that we understand them now, there's not really a great place in the world that currently has a federal jobs guarantee, but there are many places, including the United States, of countries playing with the idea of a federal jobs safety net. And safety net is just, if you were to research things like the United States Great Depression and the federal response to the Great Depression, a lot of what they did was they created jobs in infrastructure in order to give a lot of the unemployed population in the United States some form of income. The idea was not like it is today, where a federal jobs guarantee would, probably pay a living wage, a wage that's above the poverty line, and include, benefits and be not super menial jobs. That wasn't really what a concern was in the past when governments were thinking about, federal job safety nets. These were just a source of income, any source of income. But that is kind of the United States history with federal jobs backups. So if you're looking at things to familiarize yourself with federal jobs guarantees, I would highly encourage that you look at what the Green New Deal has to say and any analyses of the Green New Deal, you could certainly extrapolate a lot of evidence from the Green New Deal's federal jobs guarantee for this topic. Because when you talk about policy analysis, a lot of the time policy analysis groups aren't going to be like, let's just, theoretically consider how much a federal jobs guarantee would cost, or, the pros and cons of this theoretical federal jobs guarantee. There's not going to be a ton of evidence on that, but there will be a lot of specific evidence for plans like the Green New Deal. There's a ton of literature on the Green New Deal. Additionally, you'll also want to probably take a look at those historical examples of job safety nets, including the ones the United States did in the Great Depression. That'll just give you a little bit of context grounded in the United States, right? What has the United States done in the past? Did it infringe upon private employers? Did it infringe upon businesses being able to hire good workers? All right, that's all the topic analysis I want to get through. This next part here is a framework analysis on the Nosember topic. That was written by, this part was made up by Forrest Weintraub, who is a recently graduated debater from Fargo-Davies. He eats this stuff for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is like what he loves to do a lot of the time. So he so kindly made this for us, and he presented this at the debate workshop. I will provide as close to a facsimile of what he presented as possible. So